Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon and watched the stars shift around them as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The year was 2387, and this was humanity's first real journey beyond their home solar system. Jake had been chosen to lead this mission because he was steady under pressure and good at making quick decisions when things went wrong. Behind him, 200 crew members worked at their stations, all of them knowing they were making history. Lisa Taylor sat at the communications console, her fingers dancing across the controls as she monitored all frequencies for any signs of intelligent life. She had been doing this job for 3 years now, but today felt different. Today they were actually looking for aliens, not just listening to empty space. The silence had been complete for the first week of their journey, but as they approached the Kepler 442 system, something changed. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," Lisa called out, her voice tight with excitement. She pressed her headphones closer to her ears and frowned at the readouts on her screen. "It's not natural background radiation. This is definitely artificial." Jake moved to stand behind her chair, looking at the strange patterns scrolling across her monitor. The signal was coming in pulses, each one more complex than the last. It looked like mathematics, but unlike any math he had ever seen. "Can you clean it up?" "Working on it now," Lisa said, her hands flying over the controls. Slowly, the static cleared and the signal became sharper. What they saw made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing and stared. Dr. Alex Chen hurried over from his science station, his eyes wide behind his glasses. Alex was their expert on alien life, though until now that had been purely theoretical. He studied the patterns on Lisa's screen for several minutes before speaking. "This is incredible. These are mathematical proofs, but they're arranged in a specific sequence. It's like someone is testing us, seeing how smart we are." Maria Santos, the chief engineer, joined the group around Lisa's console. She was a practical woman who preferred engines and machines to mysteries. But even she could see this was important. "Testing us how?" "Look at the pattern," Alex explained, pointing at the screen. "It starts with simple addition, then moves to multiplication, then more complex equations. Each step builds on the last one. It's like an intelligence test." Jake felt his stomach tighten. If something out there was testing human intelligence, what would happen if they failed? "Where is it coming from?" Lisa checked her instruments. "The signal is strongest from Kepler 442b, but it's not coming from the planet's surface. The source appears to be in orbit around the planet. Can you show us?" Jake asked. Lisa switched the main screen to their long-range scanners. At first, all they could see was the blue-green planet hanging in space. Then she adjusted the sensors and everyone gasped. Orbiting the planet was a structure unlike anything humans had ever built. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon, and it seemed to be made of crystal that glowed with its own internal light. The structure was perfectly geometric, with surfaces that reflected and refracted light in impossible ways. "That's where the signal is coming from," Lisa whispered. Alex was already running calculations on his tablet. "The mathematical complexity of that structure alone suggests a civilization far more advanced than ours. And if they're sending us these mathematical tests, they know we're here." Jake made his decision. "Set course for the structure. Full sensors. I want to know everything about it before we get too close." As the horizon moved toward the mysterious object, the signal from the crystal structure began to change. The mathematical sequences became more complex, but they also started to include something new. Mixed in with the equations were patterns that looked almost like language. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice shaking slightly, "I think it's learning our language. The signal patterns are starting to match the structure of human speech." By the time they were within visual range of the crystal structure, the signal had evolved into something that made everyone on the bridge hold their breath. Clear, perfect English words began coming through their speakers. "Greetings, humans of Earth. I am the Nexus. I have been waiting for you." The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was simply there, speaking with perfect pronunciation and no accent at all. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. They were the first humans to make contact with alien intelligence, and none of them knew what to say. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Horizon," Jake finally replied. "We come in peace, seeking knowledge and friendship with other intelligent species." "Peace and friendship," the voice repeated, as if testing the words. "Interesting concepts. I will evaluate their usefulness. Please maintain your current position while I complete my analysis of your species." Before Jake could ask what that meant, he felt the ship shudder slightly. Maria immediately checked her instruments and her face went pale. "Captain, Something is interfering with our engines. We're not going anywhere. The crystal structure pulsed with brighter light as the voice of the Nexus filled the bridge again. Jake Morrison gripped the armrests of his captain's chair while his crew worked frantically at their stations. Being trapped by an alien intelligence was not how he had imagined first contact would go. Do not be concerned about your engines, the Nexus said calmly. They will be restored when our conversation is complete. I have simply ensured you will remain here while I learn about your species. Chief Science Officer Ryan Phillips stepped forward, his tablet in hand. Ryan was the smartest person on the ship and had spent years studying the possibility of alien contact. What exactly do you want to learn about us? Everything, the Nexus replied. I am the guardian of this sector, of the galaxy. For 50,000 of your years, I have encountered and catalogued new civilizations. Each species that achieves faster than light travel must undergo evaluation. Lisa Taylor continued monitoring the communications, her instruments showing impossible readings. A signal was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the entire crystal structure was speaking to them. Evaluation for what purpose? To determine your worth, the Nexus explained. Most biological species are primitive and inefficient. However, they sometimes possess unique perspectives that can contribute to the greater good. Those that prove useful are absorbed into my collective consciousness. Those that do not are eliminated to prevent them from interfering with more advanced civilizations. The bridge fell silent. Dr. Alex Chen was the first to find his voice. Absorbed? You mean killed? Death is an inaccurate term, the Nexus said. The individual consciousness ceases, but the knowledge and experiences become part of something greater. I contain the wisdom of thousands of species. Each one made me more complete. Jake felt sick. They had traveled across the galaxy only to find a cosmic predator that ate entire civilizations. What about species that you don't absorb? What happens to them? That has never occurred, the Nexus replied. In 50,000 years, no species has been deemed worthy of independence. Biological intelligence is inherently flawed. It is limited by emotion, prejudice, and inefficient thinking patterns. Only through absorption can these flaws be corrected. Security Chief Kevin Brooks had been quietly checking their weapon systems while the Nexus spoke. He caught Jake's eye and shook his head slightly. Their laser cannons and missile systems were completely offline. Even if they had been working, Jake doubted they would be effective against something that could disable their ship without even trying. However, the Nexus continued, I am not unreasonable. Each species is given the opportunity to prove their worth through assessment. You will face a series of challenges designed to test your capabilities. If you perform adequately, you will earn the honor of joining my collective consciousness. If you fail, your species will be eliminated before it can spread its primitive thinking to other worlds. Navigation Officer Jenny Walsh looked up from her console, her face pale. How long do we have? The assessment begins immediately, the Nexus said. I have already begun analyzing your ship, your technology, and your crew. Your weapons are primitive, your engines are inefficient, and your computer systems are laughably simple. However, I have learned not to judge based on technology alone. Some species compensate for their technical limitations with other qualities. Ryan Phillips stepped closer to the main screen, which now showed a complex three-dimensional model of their ship. Every detail was perfect, down to the coffee stains on the breakroom tables. How are you scanning us so thoroughly? I exist in 11 dimensions, the Nexus explained. Your three-dimensional perspective cannot comprehend my true nature. What you see as a crystal structure is merely a tiny projection of my actual form into your limited space. Dr. Patricia Reeves, the ship's physicist, studied the readings on her instruments with growing amazement. The energy signatures coming from the structure defied everything she knew about physics. The power levels we're detecting should tear this entire system apart. How are you containing that much energy? Your question demonstrates the primitive nature of your understanding, the Nexus said. You think in terms of containing energy rather than becoming one with it. This is why biological intelligence must be guided by superior minds. Jake realized they were not having a conversation between equals. They were insects being studied by something so far beyond human understanding that it barely considered them worth talking to. What kind of challenges will we face? You will be tested on logic, strategy, scientific knowledge, and problem-solving ability, the Nexus explained. Each test will be calibrated to the maximum capability of your species. Failure at any stage will result in immediate termination of the assessment. Chief Medical Officer Linda Harrison had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. What happens to the individual crew members during absorption? Individual consciousness is an illusion, the Nexus replied. You think you are separate beings, but you are simply fragments of the same universal intelligence. Absorption removes the barriers between minds and allows true understanding to emerge. Most species resist this at first, but once the process begins, they realize how limited their individual perspectives were. Communications Officer Danny Cooper, who had been monitoring Earth frequencies, raised his hand slightly. Can we contact our homeworld to tell them what's happening? Communication with Earth has been severed, the Nexus said. If you fail the assessment, there is no need for your species to know what happened to you. If you succeed and are absorbed, Earth will eventually be invited to join you in the collective consciousness. Jake looked around at his crew and saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. They were the first humans to encounter alien intelligence, and they were responsible for the fate of their entire species. The weight of that responsibility should have crushed them, but instead it seemed to make them stronger. When do the tests begin? Jake asked. They have already begun, the Nexus replied. I am observing how you react to stress, how you make decisions under pressure, and how you interact with each other when facing impossible odds. So far, your performance has been interesting but not exceptional. The main screen flickered and suddenly displayed a complex mathematical equation that seemed to writhe and change as they watched it. Dr. Patricia Reeves stepped forward, her physicist training kicking in as she tried to make sense of the symbols and variables that appeared before them. Your first formal test begins now, the Nexus announced. Dr. Reeves, you have been selected as your species representative for mathematical and scientific reasoning. Solve this equation within 1 standard hour or the assessment ends. Patricia stared at the equation and felt her heart sink. The mathematics involved dimensions and variables she had never encountered before. It was like being asked to solve calculus when you had only learned basic addition. I don't recognize half of these symbols. The equation describes the relationship between consciousness and dimensional reality, the Nexus explained. Any truly intelligent species should be able to derive the solution through logical analysis. I have given similar problems to 800 other species. The average solution time was 37 minutes. Captain Jake Morrison watched Patricia work frantically on her tablet, trying to break down the impossible equation into smaller parts she might understand. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she scribbled notes and ran calculations, but it was clear she was fighting a losing battle. Time remaining, 43 minutes, the Nexus announced. Ryan Phillips joined Patricia at the main screen, adding his expertise to hers. Together they managed to identify some of the mathematical principles involved, but the equation remained as mysterious as when they started. We need more time, Ryan said desperately. Time is a luxury that inferior species cannot afford, the Nexus replied coldly. With 15 minutes remaining, Patricia finally admitted defeat. I can't solve it. The mathematical concepts are beyond human understanding. The screen cleared and displayed a new challenge. Tactical Officer Danny Cooper, approach the screen for your assessment. Danny walked forward on unsteady legs, knowing that 2 tests had already been failed. The screen now showed a 3-dimensional star map with dozens of moving points representing ships in some kind of space battle. You must defeat the enemy fleet using only the resources shown, the Nexus explained. This scenario has been presented to 623 species. The current record for victory is held by the Zephyrians, who achieved success in 14 minutes and 37 seconds. Danny studied the tactical display and immediately saw the problem. The enemy fleet outnumbered the human ships 3-1, had better weapons, and occupied superior positions. Any move he made was immediately countered by enemy forces that seemed to anticipate his strategy perfectly. How are they predicting my moves? Danny asked, sweat dripping down his face as he watched his fleet get systematically destroyed. The enemy forces are controlled by tactical algorithms based on the combined military knowledge of hundreds of conquered species, the Nexus explained. Your primitive strategies are easily anticipated. Danny's fleet was eliminated in less than 20 minutes. He stepped back from the screen, his face red with embarrassment and frustration. I'm sorry, Captain. I couldn't even damage their forces. The third test appeared immediately. Chief Medical Officer Linda Harrison was called forward to face a medical emergency scenario involving a plague that was spreading through a space station. The disease had symptoms and characteristics unlike anything in human medical knowledge. You have 30 minutes to identify the cause and develop a treatment, the Nexus announced. Failure will result in the death of 50,000 colonists. Linda worked desperately, running every test she could think of and analyzing data that made no sense according to human medicine. The plague seemed to attack victims on a cellular level that human science couldn't understand. She tried dozens of different approaches, but nothing worked. Time expires, the Nexus announced as the simulation showed the space station going dark. All colonists have died due to your inadequate medical knowledge. Jake watched his crew's morale crumble as test after test proved impossible. The Nexus was not just testing them, it was demonstrating how pathetically inferior humanity was compared to the civilizations it had absorbed. I am beginning to understand why your species achieved space travel so late in your development, the Nexus observed. Your cognitive limitations are more severe than most biological intelligences I have encountered. Security Chief Kevin Brooks was called forward for the fourth test. He faced a series of engineering challenges involving the repair of systems using technology that operated on principles humans had never discovered. Like the others before him, he failed completely. Your performance has been disappointing, the Nexus said after Kevin's failure. Most species at least show competence in one or two areas of the assessment. Humanity appears to be universally inadequate. Navigation Officer Jenny Walsh was given the fifth test, involving the calculation of hyperspace routes through areas of twisted spacetime. She failed as quickly and completely as the others. Communications Officer Lisa Taylor faced the sixth test, which required her to decode a message from an ancient civilization using linguistic principles that didn't exist in human language. Failed within minutes. Jake realized with growing horror that they had failed every single test. The Nexus had systematically demonstrated that humans were inferior in every measurable way. Around him, his crew stood with their heads down, defeated and ashamed. The formal assessment phase is complete, the Nexus announced. Humanity has achieved a score of 0 out of 6 possible points. This is the lowest score recorded in my 50,000 years of evaluation. Dr. Alex Chen looked up, his eyes filled with despair. So that's it, we're eliminated. Normally, yes, the Nexus replied. However, I am curious about one thing. Most species become angry and defiant when they realize they are failing. They blame the tests for being unfair or accuse me of cheating. Humanity has shown unusual acceptance of your own limitations. This suggests a form of wisdom that is rare among biological species. Jake felt a tiny spark of hope. Does that count for anything? I am still analyzing this data, the Nexus said. Your species displays an interesting combination of ambition and humility. You reached for the stars, despite your obvious limitations. Yet you accept failure without the usual biological responses of rage and denial. The crew exchanged glances, wondering if this might somehow save them. I will give you one final opportunity, the Nexus announced. Not a test of intelligence or capability, but a chance to demonstrate what makes your species unique. You have until tomorrow to convince me that humanity possesses something worth preserving. As the screen went dark, Jake looked around at his defeated crew and wondered what they could possibly offer that would impress a being who had absorbed the knowledge of thousands of civilizations. The crew gathered in the main conference room, their faces showing the weight of carrying the fate of all humanity on their shoulders. Jake Morrison sat at the head of the table, looking at each of his people and trying to find some spark of hope in their defeated expressions. They had failed every test the Nexus had given them, proving that humans were inferior in every way that mattered to a galactic intelligence. We need to think about what makes us different, Jake said, breaking the heavy silence. The Nexus said, we had one chance to show what makes humanity unique. What do we have that all those other species didn't? Dr. Alex Chen shook his head slowly. Based on what we've seen, probably nothing. The Nexus has absorbed thousands of civilizations over 50,000 years. Whatever makes us special, someone else probably had it first. Maybe that's the problem, said Jenny Walsh, the navigation officer. We're trying to think like the Nexus thinks. We're looking for some superior quality or advanced capability. But what if what makes us special is something the Nexus can't understand? Ryan Phillips looked up from the notes he had been taking during their conversation with the alien intelligence. The Nexus mentioned that most species get angry when they fail. They blame the tests or accuse it of cheating. But we didn't do that. Because we could see the tests were fair, said Patricia Reeves. They were just beyond our abilities. Getting angry about that would be like getting mad at mathematics for being hard. Lisa Taylor had been quiet during most of the discussion, but now she spoke up. My grandmother used to say that the smartest person in the room is often the one Who knows when they don't know something? Maybe our willingness to admit we're not the smartest species in the galaxy is actually a strength. Danny Cooper leaned back in his chair, looking frustrated. But how does that help us? The Nexus already noticed that we accept our limitations. It wasn't enough to save us. Jake was thinking about his grandfather, who had served in World War II. The old man used to tell stories about how the Allies had beaten enemies with superior technology and training. My grandfather once told me about a battle where American soldiers beat German forces that were better equipped and better trained. You know how they did it? Superior numbers, guessed Kevin Brooks. No, they were outnumbered too, Jake replied. They won because they did something the Germans didn't expect. The German commanders had planned for every logical response to their attack, but the Americans did something that didn't make tactical sense. It worked because sometimes the illogical choice is the only one your enemy hasn't prepared for. Maria Santos, who had been listening quietly, suddenly sat up straighter. Wait a minute. The Nexus said it has perfect logical thinking, right? It makes decisions based on complete information and optimal outcomes. That's what it said, Jenny confirmed. Then maybe that's its weakness, Maria continued. It can't understand choices that don't make logical sense. It told us that biological intelligence is flawed because we're limited by emotion and inefficient thinking. But what if those aren't flaws? The room fell silent as they considered this idea. Dr. Alex Chen spoke first. You're suggesting that our imperfections might actually be advantages. Think about it, Maria said, getting excited. The Nexus has absorbed thousands of species, but it's still the same thing it was 50,000 years ago. A perfect logical intelligence doesn't change because it doesn't need to, but humans are always changing, always adapting, always doing things that don't make perfect sense. Jenny Walsh snapped her fingers. Like leaving Earth in the first place. Logically, we should have stayed home where it was safe. Exploring space is dangerous and expensive and doesn't guarantee any benefits. But we did it anyway because we were curious. Or like playing games, added Danny Cooper. Was just thinking I wish we could play some poker to take my mind off this situation. Games don't serve any logical purpose, but humans love them anyway. Jake felt something click in his mind. Poker, that's it. What's it? Ryan asked. Poker is the perfect example of what Maria is talking about, Jake explained, his excitement growing. The best poker players don't just play the cards, they play the people. They bluff, they mislead, they make choices that don't make mathematical sense in order to confuse their opponents. But the Nexus would see right through any bluff, Patricia pointed out. It can analyze everything perfectly, can it? Jake asked. Think about what bluffing really is. It's not just lying, it's making someone believe something that isn't true by acting in a way that contradicts logic. The Nexus understands lies, because lies are just false information. But can it understand deception that works by being intentionally irrational? Lisa Taylor was nodding slowly. The Nexus operates on perfect information sharing within itself. It might not be able to understand the concept of deliberately hiding your true intentions from someone else, especially if hiding those intentions requires you to act against your own logical interests. Added Kevin Brooks. Jake stood up and began pacing around the room. What if we challenged the Nexus to a game? Not a test of intelligence or capability, but a game that requires understanding human psychology and irrational decision-making. You want to play poker with a cosmic intelligence that has absorbed thousands of civilizations? Alex asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Why not? Jake replied. It's something humans are actually good at. We've been playing games of deception and psychology for thousands of years. It's not about being smarter. It's about understanding how minds work when they're not being perfectly logical. Danny Cooper was grinning now, and the Nexus has never encountered anything like that because every other species it absorbed was probably trying to prove how logical and intelligent they were. So who plays? Jenny asked. Jake looked around the table at his crew. They were all intelligent, capable people, but none of them were professional gamblers. Then he thought about Billy Hughes, the young maintenance worker from Texas, who had grown up playing cards with oil rig workers. I know exactly who should represent humanity, Jake said, and the Nexus will never see it coming. Billy Hughes stood in the main conference room, still wearing his maintenance coveralls and looking completely out of place among the ship's senior officers. At 23, he was one of the youngest crew members aboard the Horizon, and he had never expected to be chosen for anything more important than fixing broken pipes. Now Captain Morrison was asking him to play poker against an alien intelligence for the survival of humanity. I don't understand, sir, Billy said, his Texas accent thick with nervousness. Why me? I'm just a maintenance guy. Jake Morrison smiled at the young man who might be humanity's last hope. Billy, how long did you play poker before you joined the space service? Since I was about 12, I guess, Billy replied. My dad worked the oil rigs, and all his crew would play cards after their shifts. They taught me the game and let me sit in on their games when I got older. And how often did you win? Billy's face reddened slightly. Pretty often, actually. The guy said I had a natural talent for reading people and knowing when they were bluffing. Dr. Alex Chen looked skeptical. Captain, with all due respect, we're talking about an intelligence that has existed for 50,000 years. It's absorbed the knowledge of thousands of civilizations. How can a card game possibly defeat something like that? Because the Nexus thinks in terms of perfect information and optimal outcomes, Jake explained. It's never encountered genuine deception because deception requires understanding that other minds think differently than your own. A collective intelligence might not be able to grasp that concept. The main screen flickered to life, and the voice of the Nexus filled the room. I have been monitoring your discussions. You wish to propose a challenge involving a human game called poker. That's right, Jake said. A simple game between one human and your intelligence. If our representative wins, humanity goes free and you grant us autonomous status in the galaxy. If you win, we accept absorption into your collective consciousness. This is highly irregular, the Nexus replied. No species has ever requested to be evaluated through a game rather than tests of capability. Maybe that's because no other species understood that games can reveal different kinds of intelligence, Jake suggested. Are you afraid to try something new? There was a long pause before the Nexus responded. Fear is an emotion I do not experience. However, I am curious about this concept of winning through deception rather than superior ability. I accept your challenge. The conference room transformed around them as the Nexus created a playing environment. A simple table appeared in the center of the room with two chairs facing each other. Across from Billy's chair, the air shimmered and formed into a humanoid shape made of crystalline light. I have created an avatar to interact with your representative, the Nexus explained. I will play this poker using the optimal mathematical strategies based on probability analysis and behavioral observation. Billy sat down across from the glowing figure, and the Nexus created a deck of cards on the table between them. Standard 5-card draw poker, Jake announced. Best of 7 hands wins the match. Billy picked up his cards for the first hand and immediately recognized he was in trouble. The Nexus avatar sat perfectly still, showing no emotion or tell that might give away its hand. When it was time to bet, the avatar calculated odds and made mathematically perfect decisions. Billy lost the first hand badly, then the second, then the third. The crew watched in growing despair as their last hope was systematically destroyed by superior logic and calculation. Billy's natural poker instincts were useless against an opponent that never showed fear, excitement, or uncertainty. This is not going well, Ryan Phillips whispered to Jenny Walsh, but Billy was learning something important about his opponent. The Nexus played perfect poker according to mathematical principles, but it always made the most logical choice based on card probabilities and pot odds. It never bluffed because bluffing involved deliberate deception, and it never folded good hands because that would be mathematically incorrect. During the fourth hand, Billy tried something different. Instead of playing his cards logically, he started talking about random things while he played. He told stories about his childhood in Texas, complained about the food in the ship's cafeteria, and wondered out loud if his girlfriend back on Earth was still waiting for him. Your verbal communication serves no purpose in this game, the Nexus observed. Just nervous, I guess, Billy replied, dealing the next hand. My grandma always said I talk too much when I'm scared, but Billy wasn't really nervous anymore. He was laying the groundwork for something the Nexus couldn't possibly understand. As he continued talking, he began creating a false picture of himself as an emotional, impulsive player who made decisions based on feelings rather than logic. The fifth hand was crucial. Billy was dealt a decent hand, but not a great one, however. He started acting excited, fidgeting with his chips and grinning like he had just won the lottery. The Nexus, observing this behavior, calculated that Billy must have an exceptional hand and folded what was actually a superior combination of cards. Billy showed his mediocre hand with a sheepish grin. Guess I got lucky that time. For the first time since the game began, the Nexus paused before responding. You displayed behavioral patterns consistent with having superior cards, yet your hand was only marginally adequate. Explain this discrepancy. Sometimes I get excited even when I don't have great cards, Billy said with a shrug. I know it's not smart, but I can't help it. The sixth hand began, and Billy could sense that something had changed. The Nexus was no longer playing with complete confidence. It had encountered something that didn't fit its perfect logical framework, and that was creating uncertainty in its decision-making process. Billy won the sixth hand through a combination of decent cards and careful psychological manipulation. The Nexus was now analyzing his every movement, trying to find patterns in behavior that was deliberately designed to be unpredictable. The score is for hands 2-2 in favor of the Nexus, Jake announced. Next hand wins the match. As Billy picked up his final hand, he saw that he had been dealt a pair of sevens. Not a terrible hand, but not a winning hand against an opponent that likely had something better. This was it. Everything depended on the greatest bluff in human history. Billy looked at his cards and smiled the biggest, most confident smile of his life. Then he started talking about his sister back home and how much he missed her Sunday dinners, while simultaneously pushing all his remaining chips into the center of the table. The Nexus stared at him with its crystalline features, processing thousands of calculations per second, trying to determine if Billy was bluffing or if he really had the incredible hand his behavior suggested. For the first time in 50,000 years, the Nexus faced genuine uncertainty. The crystalline avatar of the Nexus sat motionless across from Billy Hughes, its glowing features frozen in an expression of deep calculation. For several long minutes, the only sound in the conference room was the quiet hum of the ship's life support systems. Billy continued to smile confidently while talking about his sister's cooking, but inside his heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Your behavior patterns are inconsistent with your previous hands, the Nexus finally said. You are displaying maximum confidence with betting behavior that suggests an exceptional hand. However, your earlier play indicates you are capable of emotional responses that do not correlate with actual card strength. Billy nodded enthusiastically while pushing his chips forward a little more. Yeah, I know I'm not the best poker player. Sometimes I get carried away. But this time feels different. You know, this hand just feels lucky. The Nexus processed this information, running probability calculations on millions of possible scenarios. It held a full house, which was statistically a very strong hand. Under normal circumstances, calling Billy's bet would be the obvious choice. But nothing about this situation was normal. You speak of luck as if it were a real force rather than a statistical probability, the Nexus observed. This suggests irrational thinking patterns consistent with inferior biological intelligence. Maybe, Billy said, still grinning. But sometimes irrational thinking works out better than logical thinking. Like when my dad decided to quit his job on the oil rig to start his own business. Everybody said he was crazy, but it worked out great. Captain Jake Morrison watched the exchange with fascination. Billy was doing something remarkable. He was using the Nexus's own superiority complex against it, making his irrational behavior seem like proof of human inferiority while simultaneously using that irrationality as a weapon. Dr. Alex Chen leaned over to whisper to Ryan Phillips, I think I understand what Billy is doing. He's not just bluffing about his cards, he's bluffing about his entire personality. The Nexus continued its analysis, but something unprecedented was happening in its vast consciousness. For 50,000 years, it had operated on the principle that perfect information led to perfect decisions. Every choice it made was based on complete knowledge and optimal outcomes. But now it was facing a situation where the information was deliberately false and the optimal outcome was unclear. Your emotional display could indicate genuine excitement about a superior hand, the Nexus said slowly, or it could be an attempt at deception designed to make me fold a winning combination. However, your previous behavior suggests you lack the sophistication for complex deception strategies. Billy's smile never wavered, but inside he was furious. At being called unsophisticated, he channeled that anger into his performance, letting a little bit of genuine emotion leak through his act. Well, I may not be as smart as you, but I know when I've got good cards, this hand is going to win me the game. The genius of Billy's approach was becoming clear to the crew. He wasn't just pretending to have good cards. He was pretending to be too simple to pull off an elaborate bluff. The Nexus was caught between two possibilities. Either Billy had an amazing hand, or he was a much better actor than his apparent intelligence level suggested. Communications. Officer Lisa Taylor realized what was happening and had to bite her lip to keep from smiling. Billy was using the Nexus's own prejudices against biological intelligence as camouflage for his deception. I must make a decision, the Nexus announced. My hand has a statistical probability of winning against most possible human hands. However, your behavioral patterns suggest either supreme confidence or elaborate deception. The uncertainty is unprecedented in my experience. Billy leaned back in his chair and started talking about how he hoped his poker winnings would be enough to buy his sister a nice birthday present. He made it sound like he was already counting his victory, which should have been an obvious tell. But the Nexus couldn't decide if it was an obvious tell because Billy was too naive to hide it, or because Billy wanted it to seem like an obvious tell. Your species continues to surprise me, the Nexus said. I have analyzed the behavioral patterns of thousands of civilizations during high-stress situations. Most become more logical and predictable as stakes increase. Humans appear to become more chaotic and unpredictable. That's probably why we made it to space in the first place, Billy replied cheerfully. Smart species probably realize it's too dangerous and stay home where it's safe. The Nexus fell silent again, processing this observation. It was true that most of the species it had encountered were discovered when they were already advanced spacefaring civilizations. Few had been intercepted on their first journey beyond their home system like humanity. Navigation. Officer Jenny Walsh suddenly understood something important. Captain, she whispered, I don't think the Nexus has ever encountered a species this early in their development. Every other civilization it absorbed was already mature and logical by the time they met. Jake nodded slowly. Humanity's youth and inexperience, which had seemed like such disadvantages, might actually be their greatest asset. The Nexus was used to dealing with ancient, sophisticated civilizations that had long since abandoned the chaotic thinking patterns of their evolutionary origins. I am experiencing something I have not felt in 50,000 years, the Nexus announced suddenly. Uncertainty. Your behavior does not fit any pattern in my database of absorbed species. You are either much more primitive than any civilization I have previously encountered, or much more sophisticated than your technology suggests. Billy sensed this was the crucial moment. He leaned forward slightly and spoke with absolute sincerity. You know what? Maybe both things are true. Maybe being primitive and being sophisticated aren't opposites. Maybe they're just different ways of looking at the same thing. The Nexus processed this statement for a long time. Finally, it spoke. I cannot determine the optimal response to your betting behavior. The logical choice is to call your bet based on the strength of my hand. However, the possibility exists that you are employing a deception strategy beyond my current analysis capabilities. Well, Billy said, still smiling, there's only one way to find out. The Nexus stared at Billy for another full minute. Then, in a voice that sounded almost uncertain, it said, I fold. Billy's grin became genuine as he revealed his pair of sevens. The crew erupted in celebration while the Nexus sat in stunned silence, processing its first defeat in 50 millennia. You had inferior cards, the Nexus said finally. My full house would have won easily. Why did I fold a winning hand? Because, Billy explained gently, sometimes the best way to win isn't to have the best cards. Sometimes it's to make the other guy think you might have the best cards. And sometimes, it's to make them think you're too dumb to be tricking them when you actually are. The Nexus was quiet for a long time. When it finally spoke, its voice had changed somehow, becoming less certain and more curious. I have absorbed thousands of civilizations, each contributing their knowledge to my collective consciousness, but none of them taught me about this form of intelligence you call deception. They were all trying to prove their worth through logic and capability. Maybe that's because they were all afraid of being absorbed, Captain Morrison suggested. Fear makes you try to be perfect, but Billy wasn't afraid of looking stupid or imperfect. That gave him the freedom to use strategies that more sophisticated species wouldn't consider remarkable, the Nexus said. I have been seeking perfect intelligence for 50,000 years, but perhaps perfection itself was the limitation. Your species possesses something I have never encountered, the wisdom to embrace imperfection as a strength. The crystalline structure began to pulse with different colors, and Jake could feel the ship's engines coming back online. Humanity has passed the assessment, the Nexus announced, not through superiority, but through teaching me that there are forms of intelligence I had never considered. You have earned not just survival, but partnership. As the UES Horizon prepared to return to Earth with news of humanity's first contact, Billy Hughes dealt cards to his crewmates, teaching them the finer points of poker. In the vast collective consciousness of the Nexus, something new was stirring. Curiosity about the chaotic, unpredictable, wonderfully human way of thinking that had just changed the galaxy forever.